The advertisement pinned to the Trading Post bulletin was simple, almost brutal in its demand. Wanted, housekeeper for isolated ranch. Must work hard, expect no coddling, and not be of a delicate constitution. No Indians need apply. It was the last line that made her pause, her dark eyes scanning the worn paper with a simmering defiance. Lily of the Morning, a Chiricahua Apache woman who had spent years navigating the harsh judgment of two worlds, needed the work desperately. The rancher, a man named John Carter, was known locally as Grim Carter for his stony silence and rigid ways. She would answer the ad, not despite the final line, but because of it. She would arrive unannounced, her heritage plain in her features and her proud bearing, to see if the man was as stern as his reputation, or if, perhaps, the frontier had carved something else entirely within him. The dust of the long trail clung to her skirts as Lily of the Morning stood before the gate of the Rocking Sea Ranch. The land sprawled austere and beautiful in the late afternoon sun, rolling grasslands framed by distant purple mountains that reminded her, with a pang, of her stolen homeland. The ranch house was a solid structure of timber and stone, built for endurance, not comfort. It looked as unwelcoming as the man who owned it. She adjusted the simple bundle of her possessions, took a breath that steadied the quickening beat of her heart, and walked toward the porch. Before she could knock, the door swung open. John Carter filled the doorway, not with bulk, but with a leanness that seemed wrought from the landscape itself. His face was all angles, shadowed by a worn hat, his eyes the color of a winter sky. They swept over her, taking in the dark braid, the high cheekbones, the quietly defiant set of her shoulders. His expression did not change. "You're lost," he stated, his voice gravelly from disuse. "The settlement is another 10 miles east." "I'm not lost," she replied, her English clear and measured. "I am here for the housekeeping position." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the sigh of the wind. His gaze flickered to the advertisement she held out, then back to her face. "It says no Indians need apply. You read it. I read it. I am here anyway. You need help. Your yard says this. Your fence post there needs repair. The curtains in the window are gray with dust. A man who sees to his cattle, but not his home, is a man who needs a keeper of the house." She met his eyes, refusing to flinch. "You may send me away, but you'll have turned away a woman who can work harder than any man you have ever hired, and who sees what needs doing without being told." John Carter's stern mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked past her, as if consulting the horizon for an answer. Pride warred with pragmatism in the lines of his face. The truth was, the house was a tomb, and the ranch was slowly becoming a monument to his solitude. He had not eaten a proper meal in weeks. "Your name?" he finally grunted. "Lily." "Lily what?" "Just Lily." Another assessing look. "The pay is $15 a month. Room is the small quarters at the back of the house. You cook, clean, mend, and tend the kitchen garden. No frills. No complaints. You break it, you replace it. You steal from me, I will not call the sheriff. Do you understand?" She gave a single, sharp nod. It was a harsh bargain, but it was a start. "I understand. Stable is around back. See to your horse. Then start in the kitchen. I expect supper at 6. He turned and disappeared into the dimness of the house, leaving the door ajar. Lily allowed herself one deep, shuddering breath. The first gate had been passed, but the fence was high and long. She found a small, Spartan room at the back. It was clean, at least, holding only a narrow cot, a washstand, and a single peg on the wall. It was more than she had expected. After tending to her weary mare, she entered the main house. The kitchen was a battlefield of neglect. Dishes were piled high, dust lay thick on every surface, and the pantry held little more than flour, beans, salt pork, and coffee. She rolled up her sleeves, her movements efficient and rhythmic. She built a fire, heated water, and began to scour. She worked in silence, but her eyes missed nothing. The single, chipped cup by the sink, the absence of any personal trinket or comfort, the way the house echoed with a hollow, lonely sound. At precisely 6 o'clock, a simple meal of beans, pan bread, and strong coffee was on the table. John Carter entered, washed at the basin she had pointed him to, and sat. He ate methodically, not tasting, simply fueling. He did not offer thanks, nor did she expect any. But as he finished his coffee, his eyes scanned the room. The clean surfaces, the orderly shelves, the faint, clean smell of soap and hearth smoke. "The bread is adequate," he said, the words seeming to cost him something. He rose, his chair scraping against the floor. "I ride out dawn. Breakfast at 5. It will be ready," she said. That night, lying in her narrow cot, Lily stared at the ceiling. The rancher was stern, yes, but his sternness felt less like cruelty and more like a fortress wall, erected stone by stone around a quiet, deep-buried pain. She had seen a flicker of it when he looked at the cleaned kitchen, not gratitude, but a kind of startled recognition, as if he had forgotten a home could feel like this. The work would be hard, the silence heavier than any load. But as the cry of a coyote echoed from the hills, a familiar sound in this unfamiliar place, she felt the first, faint stirring of something she thought she had lost long ago, a sense of purpose and a fragile, wary thread of connection to this man and this stark, beautiful land. The weeks settled into a rhythm as steady as the turning of the earth. Lily's presence, once a startling intrusion, became a quiet constant. She rose before the sun, stoking the stove and filling the kitchen with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. John would appear, eat in his usual silence, and then depart with a nod, his figure growing smaller against the vastness of the prairie. Lily would work through the day, not just cleaning, but restoring. She beat the dust from rugs, aired out rooms that smelled of loneliness, and, with seeds bartered from a passing trader, began to revive the withered kitchen garden. The silence between them was a living thing. It was not always comfortable, but Lily began to discern its textures. There was the busy silence of work, the weary silence of evening, and the brittle silence that sometimes fell over John when a particular memory seemed to snag him, leaving him staring into the distance with a look of profound loss. One afternoon, a different silence descended. A group of 3 riders, rough-looking men with the hungry eyes of those who lived on the edges of the law, approached the ranch. John was mending a harness on the porch. Lily, weeding the garden, saw his posture go rigid. He did not reach for the rifle leaning against the wall, but his hand rested near it. "Afternoon, Carter," the lead rider, a man with a greasy beard, said. "Heard you got yourself some new help." His eyes slid past John, lingering on Lily with an insolent curiosity that made her skin crawl. "What's your business, Dobson?" John's voice was flat, devoid of any welcome. "Just passing through. Thought we might water our horses. Maybe get a bite to eat from your housekeeper." The way he said the word was an insult. "You can water at the creek. Same as always. Then move on." Dobson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Not very neighborly, especially for a man living way out here with just a squaw for company. Might be unsafe. In a movement so fluid it seemed rehearsed, John picked up the rifle, not pointing it, but cradling it in the crook of his arm. The action was casual, but its meaning was absolute. "The only thing unsafe here is you overstaying your welcome. The creek's to the west. You're blocking my sunlight." The men exchanged glances. They were bullies, used to pushing where they thought the fence was weak. John Carter's unyielding stance, the cold certainty in his eyes, presented a fence made of iron. With a muttered curse, Dobson turned his horse. "Have it your way. This place ain't worth the trouble anyhow." They rode off in a cloud of dust and muttered threats. John watched until they were specks on the horizon before slowly lowering the rifle. He found Lily standing by the garden fence, her hands still clutching weeds, her face composed, but her eyes wide. "They won't be back," he said, more to himself than to her. "You did not have to do that," she said softly. He turned his wintry gaze on her. "This is my ranch. You are under my roof. That makes you my business." It wasn't spoken with kindness, but with a fierce, unwavering sense of responsibility. It was the first time he had acknowledged her as anything other than hired help. That night, supper was the usual quiet affair, but the air had changed. The fortress wall had not fallen, but a gate, however small and well-defended, had been glimpsed. The next morning, John did not immediately leave after breakfast. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen doorway. "I'm riding to the north pasture. The old line shack needs checking before winter." He paused. There's a canyon up that way. Has a spring and some ancient pictographs on the walls. If your work is done, you might see it." He said it like a challenge, as if expecting her to refuse. Lily hid her surprise. "My work will be done by noon." He gave a curt nod and left. True to her word, by midday the house was in order. She saddled her mare and rode in the direction he had described. The canyon was a hidden seam in the earth, lush and cool compared to the sun-baked plains. And there on the smooth rock face were figures painted in faded ochre and red, hunters' spirals, handprints, the art of her people's ancient cousins, or perhaps of tribes long gone. A deep, resonant ache filled her chest, a mix of sorrow and belonging. She did not hear John approach. He sat on his horse a respectful distance away, watching her. "My wife, Anna," he said suddenly, the words raw in the quiet canyon. She loved this place. She said it felt sacred. Lily did not turn, her eyes still on the pictographs. It was the first time he had spoken of a past, of a person he had loved. What happened to her? A long silence. Fever. 5 years ago. The doctor came too late from town. The simple statement held a universe of grief and self-blame. She was soft, like the flowers she tried to grow here. This land isn't made for soft things. "The land is hard," Lily agreed, finally, looking at him. "But it is not cruel. It gives what it can to those who understand its language. Your wife, she heard a different song in it than you do. That is not a weakness." John Carter looked at this Apache woman who saw dust and order, who faced down bigots without flinching, who understood the silent language of stone and spring. For the first time in 5 years, the fortress wall did not just have a gate. A single stone, heavy with grief, shifted. He did not smile, but the sternness in his face softened into something more simply weary and more human. "We should head back," he said, his voice less gravelly. Storms building in the west. The ride back was made in a silence that was new. It was not empty. It was filled with the shared knowledge of loss and the tentative, unspoken acknowledgement that they were in their own ways survivors. The walls, for both of them, remained, but they were no longer facing each other from separate, lonely forts. They were, perhaps, beginning to build a shared shelter against the common wind. The turning of the seasons became the true measure of their lives. Under Lily's care, the ranch house began to breathe. Geraniums bloomed in salvaged tins on the windowsill. Curtains, sewn from sturdy calico, fluttered in the breeze. The kitchen garden yielded potatoes, carrots, and herbs, their scents mingling with the aroma of stews and fresh bread. John's silent approval showed in small ways. A neatly stacked pile of firewood by her door, a new bucket for the garden, a bolt of warmer fabric left on the kitchen table before the first frost. The incident with Dobson's men proved a watershed. The ranch, once a target for petty harassment, was now left alone. Word had spread that grim Carter's sternness had sharpened into a protective edge where his housekeeper was concerned. Lily, for her part, began to move through the world of the nearby settlement with less tension. John would sometimes give her a list of supplies, and she would ride in, conducting her business with a quiet dignity that discouraged open rudity. People began to simply call her Lily from the rocking sea, the association with Carter granting her a grudging, if distant, acceptance. One bitter, cold morning in late autumn, the rhythm broke. John returned from checking his herd early, his face ashen beneath his weather-beaten tan. He didn't go to barn, but straight to the house, moving with a stiff urgency. "Lily," he called, his voice strained. She met him in the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. One look at him told her something was terribly wrong. His left arm was held awkwardly against his body. Horse slipped on ice in the draw. Fell on me. Shoulders out, I think. And maybe broken. He said it through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. All protocol, all distance, vanished in that instant. Sit, she commanded, pointing to a chair. She stoked the fire to a roar and fetched a basin of clean snow to melt. Her movements were quick, sure. She had set bones and treated wounds before. Such knowledge was second nature in the life she had known. This will hurt, she said, her voice low and steady. Bite on this. She handed him a leather strap. John stared at her, seeing not just the housekeeper, but the resourceful woman who had survived a world harsher than any ranch. He took the strap. With a confidence that brooked no argument, she positioned him, her small, strong hands probing the distorted joint. She met his gaze, gave a sharp nod, and with a swift, practiced motion, pulled and rotated. A grunt of agony was swallowed by the leather. Then, a palpable pop. The relief was immediate, washing over his face. She quickly fashioned a sling from a clean sheet, immobilizing the arm against his chest. The bone is not broken, only the joint was displaced. But you must keep it still. You have cracked ribs also, I think. John, breathing heavily, nodded. The pain was still there, but it was a clean, manageable ache compared to the white-hot torment of moments before. He watched her as she brewed a strong tea from willow bark she had gathered and dried herself, a trick for pain her people had always known. Thank you, he said, the words simple and profound. You would have done the same, she replied, not looking up from her task. I wouldn't have known how. She brought him the tea. Then, it is good I am here. For the next week, their roles reversed. Lily took over the essential outside chores, feeding the stock, drawing water, while also tending the house, and John. He was a terrible patient, frustrated by his helplessness. But her calm, no-nonsense care wore down his irritability. He found himself talking more, not of deep things, but of ranch matters, his worries about a particular heifer, his plans for a new corral in the spring. One evening, as she changed the bandages that bound his ribs, he spoke into the firelit quiet. My father, he was a lot like Dobson, thought kindness was a currency for fools. He ran this place with an iron fist. Anna, she was the first soft thing he couldn't break, and it confused him. When she died, I thought maybe he was right, that caring for something just makes its loss a weapon against you. Lily finished her task and sat back listening. You're not soft, Lily, he continued, his gaze on the flames. But you're not hard like him, either. You're strong, like good timber. It bends but doesn't break. It was the closest he had ever come to a compliment, and to an apology for his own former harshness. Grief is a heavy load, she said quietly. It can make a person think they must carry it alone, or it will crush those around them. But sometimes sharing the weight does not make the load heavier. It makes the shoulders stronger. John looked at her then, truly looked at her. He saw the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in her worn hands, the quiet resilience in her posture. He saw a partner, not just an employee. The fortress was not just breached. Its purpose was being questioned. What was it defending, if not an empty throne in a hall of echoes? The garden will need mulching before the deep snow, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I can talk you through it if you're willing to do the work. A faint, real smile touched Lily's lips for the first time in his presence. I'm always willing to do the work. The winter that followed was one of the hardest in memory. Blizzards howled across the plains, isolating the rocking sea for weeks at a time. But inside the house, a new warmth had taken root. They shared meals by the fire, John teaching Lily to play chess with a worn set that had been Anna's, Lily telling him, in her sparse way, stories of the desert and the stars, stories not of her own painful past, but of her people's understanding of the world. They were two solitary figures, learning the difficult, beautiful art of not being alone. The rancher's sternness had not vanished, but it had been tempered, like steel, by a respect and a gratitude that ran deeper than words. And the Apache woman, who had arrived seeking only survival, found herself standing not as an outsider, but as a vital, respected pillar of a home she had helped to rebuild from the ground up. The great thaw came slowly, turning the world into a sea of mud and promise. With John's arm healed, they fell into a new, more collaborative rhythm. He consulted her on the placement of the new corral, valuing her eye for the land. She took over the ordering of seeds and supplies with a thriftiness that impressed him. The ranch was no longer his ranch. It was becoming theirs in everything but name. The change was noticed. When a circuit-riding preacher came through in the spring, he was invited for supper, a first in John Carter's tenure. Over stew, the man, keen-eyed and kindly, observed the easy, wordless coordination between the rancher and his housekeeper. He saw the way John automatically refilled Lily's water glass, the way she passed him the salt before he reached for it. "You have a fine place here, Mr. Carter," the preacher remarked. "A real home. It's a blessing to see after so long." John merely nodded, but a flush crept up his neck. Later, as the preacher prepared to leave, he took John aside. "That woman is a treasure, son, a helpmeet sent by Providence. A man would be a fool not to secure such a blessing properly." He didn't elaborate, but his meaning hung in the crisp night air. The words planted a seed of quiet turmoil in John. The preacher's notion of properly implied a legality, a contract of the white man's world that felt both foreign and daunting. What he and Lily had built was organic, born of shared toil and silent understanding. Was a piece of paper from a distant town necessary to confirm its truth? He wrestled with it for days, until another event forced his hand. A government man, a census taker, arrived. He was officious, peering at his clipboard. "John Carter, head of household." "And you are?" he asked Lily, who was kneading bread at the table. "Lily, the housekeeper." The man made a note. Relationship to head of household, domestic servant. Race, Indian. The words, so clinical and cold, cut through the room. John saw the slight stiffening of Lily's back, though her hands never paused in their work. After the man left, a thick silence descended. The labels hung in the air, reducing their complex, hard-won partnership to a crude transaction between races. That night, John did not retreat to his chair by the fire. He stood by the window, watching the moon rise. What that man wrote, it wasn't right. Lily looked up from her mending. "It is what it is on paper. It does not change what is here. It does to the world outside," John said, turning to face her. His stern features were etched with a new kind of determination. "The preacher, he called you a helpmeet. He was right, but he was wrong, too. You're not a helper. You're the cornerstone. This place would have fallen down around my ears without you. I would have." He took a step toward her, his movements uncharacteristically hesitant. "Lily, I can't offer you fancy words or an easy life. All I have is this land, this work, and my respect, my deep respect. But I want to offer it in a way that even a fool with a clipboard can't misunderstand." He drew a deep breath. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." The question hung in the air, vast and simple. Lily set her mending aside slowly. She thought not of grand romance, for that was not their way, but of shared sunrises, of protected silences, of a shoulder set right by her own hands, of a canyon with ancient pictures that felt like a shared prayer. She thought of the word wife and compared it to the word servant. One was a position. The other, as he meant it, was a partnership. "I do not need a paper to know my worth, John Carter," she said, her voice clear. "But if a paper is needed to tell the world my place is here, beside you, and not in your kitchen as a servant, then I will have that paper." A faint, rare smile touched her eyes. "And I would be honored to be your wife." There was no embrace, no dramatic kiss. The moment was too profound for such gestures. Instead, John simply reached out and, with his work-roughened hand, covered hers where it lay on the table. It was the first intentional, gentle touch they had ever shared. It spoke of a pact, a future, a belonging. They were married a week later by the returning preacher in a simple ceremony on the porch, with the land itself as their witness. There was no wedding dress, only Lily's best calico. No ring, but John had secretly carved a small, elegant hair comb from a piece of oak, which he presented to her with clumsy solemnity. She wore it in her hair every day thereafter. The story of Grim Carter marrying his Apache housekeeper rippled through the territory. Some sneered, some shrugged, but on the rocking sea, a profound peace settled. The marriage was not an end, but a beginning, the formal ratification of a bond that had been forged piece by piece in shared labor, quiet respect, and the unspoken language of healing. The rancher had discovered sternness was no match for strength, and the Apache woman had found that a home was not a place given, but a thing built together with willing hands and open hearts. Their love was not a wildfire, but the slow, deep growth of an oak on the prairie, its roots intertwined against every storm.